Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. 6 cases of the Brazilian variant of the virus were found in the UK. Authorities are concerned. Former US President Trump gives his first speech since leaving office. And all England households with school-aged children offered home test kits. Authorities are concerned after at least 6 cases of a Brazilian variant were found in the UK. The variant may be more transmissible. NTD's Eddie Aitken has more.
Authorities on Sunday said they have identified at least 6 individuals infected with a Brazilian variant for the first time in the UK.
We are concerned that this may have increased transmissibility, may lead to more infections, and we don't yet know the vaccine effect, and so really want to prevent the spread in the UK population.
2 cases are from one household in South Gloucestershire who are known to have travelled to Brazil. Another was found in England and 3 cases are in Scotland. Authorities say the risk is still low. They are following up with individuals who were on a flight on the 12th of February from Sao Paulo to London.
And therefore we are seeking all individuals on that flight to come forward for themselves and their household contacts to be tested so that we can ensure that there's no residual cases out there that could have been positive in relation to this case.
Professor for microbial genomics at the University of Birmingham, Nick Lohman, says the variant might be able to reinfect patients who have already suffered another variant of the virus, and that in Brazil this variant is linked with a severe second wave late last year. Lohman says that evidence is still limited and more investigation is needed. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak says the government's cautious moves towards easing the lockdown is to avoid a stop-start approach for businesses. NTD's Eddie Aitken has the story.
Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak ruling out a faster exit out of England's latest lockdown.
What businesses don't want is a stop-start approach to this. We want to know that it's a one-way road, and that's why it's cautious. We've given the earliest of dates.
Speaking on Sky News on Sunday, Sunak says the roadmap set out by the government last week is a cautious but irreversible approach, but could go even slower if things don't go to plan.
And then obviously we might have to adjust those if things are not going exactly as we would like. But look, the early signs are promising.
England's third lockdown is now entering its 3rd month since early January.
The coronavirus has also just had an enormous toll on our economy, and I want to level with people about that.
Sunak warned about the longer-term impact on the national debt that could last way beyond the pandemic.
We do have a challenge in our public finances, and if we don't do anything, borrowing will continue to be at very high levels. Even after we've recovered from COVID, debt will continue to rise indefinitely.
The Office for National Statistics put government borrowing at £270.6 billion for this financial year. It's over £220 billion more than a year ago. Sunak is due to set out the UK budget on Wednesday the 3rd of March with an emphasis on support for businesses as more of the economy opens up. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Today, wedding and civil partnership ceremonies can take place at licensed venues in Wales as lockdown restrictions are slightly eased. Wedding receptions, though, are still not permitted to take place there. This has caused many couples to delay their big date. The Welsh Government will next review the lockdown restrictions on the 12th of March. Wales's First Minister, Mark Drakeford, speaking at a briefing today, said there are encouraging signs that the worst of the second wave is behind us. Former US President Donald Trump gave his first speech on Sunday since leaving office. Speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference, he talked about whether he'll run again in 2024 and whether he would form a new party. NTD's Alison Lee tells us more.
Hello, CPAC. Do you miss me yet?
During his much-anticipated speech at CPAC, former President Trump tells his supporters the journey they started is far from over.
As we gather this week, we're in the middle of a historic struggle for America's future, America's culture, and America's institutions, borders, and most cherished principles. Our security, our prosperity, and our very identity as Americans is at stake, like perhaps at no other time.
Trump says his movement will continue to fight socialism and communism.
We will save and strengthen America, and we will fight the onslaught of radicalism, socialism, and indeed it all leads to communism once and for all. That's what it leads to.
Trump's hour and 30-minute-long speech covers criticisms of Biden's policies and a review of his own achievements in office. Trump also answers some much-anticipated questions, such as whether he will form a new party.
I am not starting a new party. That was fake news. Fake news, no. Wouldn't that be brilliant? Let's start a new party and let's divide our vote so that you can never win. No, we're not interested in that. No.
Instead, Trump says the MAGA movement should define the future of the Republican Party. He also hints at the possibility of running for president again in 2024.
Who knows? I may even decide to beat them for a third time. A Republican president will make a triumphant return to the White House, and I wonder who that will be.
Trump vows to help elect Republican leaders to the Senate and the House. He concludes his speech with an encouraging message to his supporters. Our brightest days are just ahead, Trump says. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
And CPAC attendees told NTD they are determined to hold on to Trump's tough on China policy, even as the Biden administration tries to change course. NTD's Melina Weiskop brings us more from U.S. Congress members and conference attendees.
This year's annual Conservative Political Action Conference was mainly focused on fighting against cancel culture and big tech, but they also had a strong focus on battling socialist and communist ideology, especially here in America. One big focus was on battling the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. One example, their cover-up of the CCP virus, which devastated economies around the world, except their own.
I mean, they are using this as an opportunity to step up. The only economy that theoretically has grown during 2020 has been the Chinese economy. Now, I don't believe the numbers coming out of China, I never have, but they have positioned themselves pretty well on the back of this virus that they are alone responsible for unleashing around the world. All you have to do is look back to what happened at the beginning. They silenced researchers, they destroyed samples, they blocked air travel from Wuhan to other parts of China and in the interior, while they allowed people to continue to fly from Wuhan to other international ports, like Italy, like North America.
That's why he says Biden's rejoining the World Health Organization without trying to make reforms first is a major concern. Another threat Senator Hagerty and other congressional Republicans are keeping an eye on is Huawei's 5G and other Chinese military companies. Texas's U.S. Representative Jackson stepping up to the plate immediately. After being elected in November, the first bill he wrote aims to reinstate sanctions on Chinese military companies. This after Biden has put a hold on Trump's sanctions.
So it moves into from an authorization to a requirement. And we think that's important because there are a lot of companies that are popping up out there that are purely companies that are put together to prop up and to provide for the Chinese military. Some of those companies are even being traded on our stock market and stuff now. Americans are investing in these companies. And so we as Americans don't want to be responsible for investing in the Chinese military that is our adversary and may someday be used against us.
One CPAC attendee says he feels that the CCP's threat still goes unnoticed by many Americans because of how sneaky the regime has been in burrowing its way in.
It's almost like a little stream and not a rushing river that's coming at us. And when you have a government that is building islands in the middle of nowhere, and then they're not going to militarize them, and then they militarize them, at what point do other countries wake up?
And this isn't about the Chinese people. We love the Chinese people. This is about the communist regime that runs China under an iron fist.
Every Congress member we spoke to says the Republicans are united on a strong stance against the regime. Now it's just a matter of how conservatives plan to hold ground if Biden doesn't join them in the fight against the communist specter's influence. Melina Weiskop, NTD News.
All households in England with school or college-age children will be offered 2 rapid COVID-19 tests per person each week. The government's priority is to get young people back in the classroom. Here's NTD's Neil Woodrow with more.
The Department of Health says about 1 in 3 people with coronavirus are asymptomatic but can still pass it on to others. Matt Hancock says targeted regular testing will mean more positive cases are kept out of schools and colleges. The Department of Health says rapid test kits will be made available at more than 500 locations from Monday, including through workplace testing and local community testing services. Secondary school pupils will receive their first 3 tests at their place of study, supervised by a trained operator. They will then self-administer. Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy at the Association of School and College Leaders, said testing all secondary school pupils 3 times on site in the fortnight beginning on Monday 8th of March is a huge logistical challenge. The scale of the testing required is huge. Primary school pupils are not being asked to test at this stage. Government figures show that on Friday, compared to the previous 7 days, testing was up around 21%. And on Sunday, positive cases fell by a similar 21%. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
Up next, the UK Foreign Secretary condemns Hong Kong as 47 pro-democracy activists head to court. That and more when we return. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab condemns Hong Kong for charging 47 pro-democracy campaigners with subversion. Charged yesterday, the activists will be appearing in court today. NTD's 88 Ken has more.
Raab said on Twitter that the decision to charge 47 Hong Kong politicians and activists for subversion under the national security law is deeply disturbing. It shows in the starkest terms the law being used to eliminate political dissident rather than restore order, contrary to what the Chinese government promised. About 1,000 people gather outside the West Kowloon court ahead of the hearing. Security is tight with more than 100 police officers deployed.
They sacrificed their future for Hong Kong. Maybe this is the last chance to see them or say goodbye. I will treasure every moment that I can meet them. So even though it's so early, I still came here.
With many dressed in black, the colour associated with the 2019 pro-democracy protests.
I'm here to support the 47 arrestees. This political oppression is definitely shameful. Why would the core values established by the UK be completely destroyed nowadays?
Several foreign diplomats joined the crowds outside the courthouse, including British diplomat at the UK consulate in the region, Jonathan Williams.
The Chinese and Hong Kong authorities promised that the national security law would be used in a very narrow sense. It's clear that that is no longer being the case, and that's deeply concerning to us. So that's why we're here with a number of other foreign consulates.
The 47 are accused of organising and participating in an unofficial primary poll last July, aimed at selecting the strongest candidates for a Legislative Council election. The authorities say the informal poll was part of a plan to overthrow the government. Among those charged were the organisers of the poll and former law professor Benny Tai, as well as prominent activists Lester Shum, Joshua Wong and Owen Chow. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
An unexploded World War II bomb found in Exeter was blown up in a controlled detonation on Saturday. NTD's Marianne Letham tells us more.
The World War II bomb was found by builders on Friday morning near the University of Exeter. More than 2,600 households and students from the university halls of residence were evacuated from a 400-metre exclusion zone around the bomb. Bomb disposal experts worked overnight to build an exclosure around the bomb using 400 tons of sand. Police said the 1,000-kilogram Hermann bomb was detonated just after 6 p.m. on Saturday. According to the BBC, there were reports of the bang being heard 5 miles away. Police said extensive safety assessment work was being carried out after the detonation. Evacuated residents living outside a 100-metre exclusion zone could return home on Sunday evening. Those living within the smaller cordon were not yet allowed to return home. Marianne Leatham, NTD News, London.
A massive Cold War-era nuclear bunker in southwest England has gone on sale via auction for just over £435,000. NTD's Marianne Leatham tells us more.
The bunker has 56 bedrooms over 200 ground stories and is located near Salcombe in Devon. The caretaker says the bunker is highly secure and would have served its purpose well.
There were people here 24 hours a day, and it was kept fully operational in as much that all the systems were kept so that they could be brought into use should the bomb have gone off.
It was originally built in 1941 as a World War II-era radar station. It was then refitted in the 1950s to serve as a regional government base in the event of a nuclear attack, and was kept on standby until the 1990s.
It's a kind of a reminder of what a frightening world, people were living in under the shadow of the bomb. That fear of nuclear annihilation in the 50s and 60s and 70s was really, really great. And, I think younger generations don't realise it.
The caretaker also mentions that the bunker may be haunted, saying some old RAF people describe hearing a wartime pilot visit on occasion.
And they particularly heard his flying boots sort of flapping and knocking and stuff, and he would have a shake of the gate that used to be there and then disappear back down.
The bunker is back on the market after it failed to reach its reserve price at an auction earlier in February. Marianne Leatham, NTD News.
The hospitality industry says as the industry opens in June instead of April, the sector is going to take a £9 billion hit. 80 MPs from across the political divide are urging the government to help. NTD's Al Rhodes has the details.
Trade body UK Hospitality says the hospitality industry is picking up a £9 billion bill by the lifting of all virus restrictions in June instead of April. 80 MPs across the divide have urged the Chancellor Rishi Sunak to invest more in the recovery of the sector, which has ravaged restaurants, pubs and hotels. The government's roadmap out of lockdown says the indoor dining can only start from the 17th of May. Hotels and B&Bs will need to wait until May to reopen as well. UK Hospitality says if the furlough scheme is not extended beyond April, nearly 100,000 jobs would be at risk. That would add to the 660,000 already lost. The government does have a £5 billion scheme to help the sector, but UK Hospitality says more is needed, including extending a VAT cut and to apply further relief to drinks sold on the premises. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
As the Western world moves to lower carbon emissions, can the Chinese regime be trusted to do the same? NTD's Penny Joel has more.
China is the world's largest polluter. Its carbon dioxide emissions accounts for nearly a third of the world's total, more than the US and European Union combined. New research from an Australia think tank says China emits more carbon dioxide in 16 days than Australia does in an entire year. Nonetheless, Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping won himself a round of praise from Western media, climate change groups, and world leaders last year in September. That's by making an ambitious promise in a virtual speech at the United Nations General Assembly.
China strives to peak its carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and work towards carbon neutrality by 2060.
But he didn't detail how China would meet those targets. Despite the promise, researchers found that what the regime is actually doing doesn't quite fit their words.
Well, last year, China opened 3 times as much coal-fired power capacity as the rest of the world combined.
Beijing continues to rely on coal, one of its most dirty methods of stimulating the economy. According to American think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies, between 2000 and 2018, China's carbon dioxide emissions skyrocketed, totaling more than all European, Africa, and Latin American countries combined. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
A huge iceberg the size of Bedfordshire has broken off the 150-metre thick Brunt ice shelf in Antarctica. Joy Dogood has a story.
Glaciologists at the British Antarctic Survey, BAS's Halle Research Station in Antarctica, have been predicting what's called a calving for at least a decade, since noticing vast cracks in the ice. The first indication that a calving was imminent came in November 2020, when a new chasm headed towards another large chasm nearly 22 miles away. It's the third major crack in the ice shelf that's become active in the last 10 years. In January, the rift pushed northeast at up to 0.6 miles per day, cutting through the thick floating ice shelf. The iceberg was formed when the crack widened several hundred metres in a few hours on the morning of 26th of February, finally breaking from the rest of the floating ice shelf. The research station is unlikely to be in danger, as it was moved about 20 miles inland in 2016 to avoid all the active chasms that were opening up. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
Coming up, did you see a large and bright meteor lighting up the sky last night? Catch that after the break. A rise in rail fares in England and Wales for the first time in 7 years. The rise is above inflation. NTD's Jane Worrell has the story.
A price hike delayed because of the pandemic. Passengers in England and Wales now hit with a 2.6% increase in rail tickets. We spoke to some people who were taking a trip.
I've had to come in today for work and it's been okay. I was a little bit anxious, but the trains are all fine, there's social distancing seating, and I think you're kind of pushing people out of London to, hike the prices up, to be honest. It's an expensive place to come, so to make it even worse, jobs probably won't get filled in this area.
But others are willing to pay extra.
I think they've got to put some prices up because they're losing money and we need to possibly subsidise the networks from a government point of view.
It's definitely a lot more expensive in the UK to travel by public transport than it is in Australia. But then again, the system is also far more reliable and frequent and faster. So I guess it's you pay for what you get to some extent.
This resident isn't impacted but thinks it's not the right time for a price hike.
Possibly, but it's possibly also the wrong time to be doing it. Let's wait till the world picks up a bit and then they can start hiking up the prices.
Analysis from the Labour Party shows a 43% increase in fares in the last decade, with some commuters facing a nearly £3,500 increase in their season ticket. The Rail Minister says it ensures taxpayers aren't overburdened, since taxes have already helped to cover increased costs to keep services running during the pandemic. This year's rise is above inflation, but a Department for Transport spokesperson said it's the lowest increase in 4 years. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Volkswagen reported a better than expected profit for 2020. The German carmaker says it's hopeful for this year. NTD's Roads has more.
Volkswagen says it has rebounded from last year's crisis. The German carmaker reported a profit of £7.59 billion for 2020. That's only half of 2019, but still better than expected. Volkswagen says it sees significantly better sales and deliveries this year. Sales in 2020 dropped to 9.2 million vehicles. Like other established car makers, Volkswagen is trying to catch up with Tesla for the electric car market. In 2020, it tripled its sales of electric vehicles. Sales of fully electric Porsche Taycan, as well as other luxury vehicles, boosted the group's profits. Volkswagen is the world's second biggest car maker by cars sold after Toyota. The German company will announce more financial details at its annual news conference in 2 weeks. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
A large meteor brought a flash of bright light and great excitement last night. It was seen for about 7 seconds just before 10 p.m. Dozens of people from Manchester to Cardiff and Milton Keynes spotted it, some on security cameras. A group of amateur astronomers, UK Meteor Network, classified it as a fireball, a term for a particularly bright meteor. That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees.